turning to the world's two biggest economies, the US and China. Are trade talks under threat? China's government says it is going to start charging extra fees to American-linked ships that use its ports. The new charges are set to come into force on Tuesday next week, which is the same day that similar American fees on Chinese ships come into force. Now, the signs of heightened tension come after China tightened export controls on rare earths and before President Trump and President Xi are due to meet at the end of this month. Well, Jon Czin is a China expert at the Brookings Institution, a non-partisan think tank based in Washington. He's also a former director for China at the US National Security Council. Jon, good to see you this morning. What do you make of these new shipping fees from China and the message that they send on trade?
Yeah, well, of course, the timing of these new moves is really interesting, right? Because just a few weeks ago, we had a phone call between President Xi and President Trump, after which President Trump said that the two leaders would be meeting on the margins of APEC. And I think what's really interesting here is that instead of trying to create a positive atmosphere ahead of that meeting, that what we see from the Chinese side are these punitive measures over the last 2 days, these countermeasures to U.S. actions. I think what's going on here is that the Chinese side feels that they have the upper hand and they have leverage, and they're using that meeting that upcoming meeting to maximum effect here. And I think what's happening more broadly, and I think we've seen this over the last year or so from Xi Jinping, is that he's moving from playing defense with the United States to now playing offense and looking for ways to seize the initiative and shape the bilateral dynamic.
Presumably he feels he's sort of seen some success on the soybean front, for example, where that is a huge export for American farmers to China. That's pretty much fallen to zero. And of course, yesterday we saw China announcing new export controls on rare earths. That was something which the most recent talks between these two seemed to yield progress on.
Yeah, I think that's right. That's what's very striking about this. And I think what's important here is the particulars of the agreement, such as what we've seen in the press. Namely, the Chinese side didn't agree to roll back their export controls, right? What they agreed to do was give licenses so that these could be exported to the United States. And imposing that regime in the first place gave them leverage to tighten it up. And now what we're seeing is a new regime. And the irony of it for the United States is that this looks very similar to the export control regime that the United States put in place against China during the Biden administration, right? So there is a certain mirror imaging that's going on there. I think what's interesting with the soybeans in particular is that it does give China leverage, but I don't know if those were necessarily included in the discussions that happened between the US and Chinese side in earlier rounds of negotiations. And I think that's how China is playing this game. Each time they are able to secure some kind of agreement with the Trump administration on a particular issue, China puts out something new, right? And then the discussion ends up shifting to that. And so it's a game. What happens is that the Trump administration is having to play a game of whack-a-mole and deal with these issues as they come up.
But then for the global economy, if things go wrong and we head back to a world with even higher tariffs and more export controls, I mean, that is the huge fear here. And that seems to be the mood as we kind of head into this meeting between these two leaders.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the risk. But I think what China took away from the Liberation Day tariffs and the cycle of escalation followed by de-escalation is that the Chinese side had a higher pain threshold for the pain that was caused by those tariffs, right? And I think from their perspective, the Trump administration blinked. And I think their anticipation is that even if the U.S. imposes some kind of countermeasures in response to what China has done, that ultimately the United States will back down and that China is a better position to go through this. I think part of what Xi is banking on, too, as I noted at the outset, is that Trump wants some kind of meeting. He wants to meet with Xi at APEC and that he wants some kind of deal. And I think in the way that China has constructed these export controls, they've left some wiggle room for that, right? These export controls will not go into effect until December 1st. And so that opens up the possibility that there can be some kind of negotiation over how stringently they end up implementing these export controls in the coming months.
Jon Czin, China expert at the Brookings Institution. A lot to watch in the coming weeks ahead.